Hi, I'm here with Gabriela Alcántara Diaz. She's the founder and the president of Semilla Multicultural, which is a creative agency based out of Miami. Semilla's focus is on celebrating diversity and upward mobility, and that's so relevant for our conversation today, Gabby. I'm so excited that we're here to talk about your brother Luis. So, Luis was an inspiration to everyone who knew him. He became the highest ranking Hispanic engineer in Toyota. So let's start by talking a little bit about his personality, if you don't mind.
I'd like to say hello, and I'd like to thank you, today to really give us the opportunity to share our Lou's legacy, as we call him, and we're just very excited. And you and I sort of share cultural roots, so I think it makes it even more special. And then also to plug that there may be a little slight noise in addition to my voice and interview is because we're basically taking the call from a very special place here in Miami that has Uruguayan roots. So surrounded by my cultural roots where my brother and I were born.
I think that gives you a lot of good strength and good vibes. So I'm delighted that you shared that with us. So Gabby, tell me, three words that come up in the context of Luis are humility, discipline, confidence. How did he embody these traits, and why are they important in leadership?
Uh, when I talk about humility and my brother is that he was able to truly reach the epitome of his career right before he passed. And throughout his career and his milestones, he never lost sort of sight of where he came from and also never felt as though he had to embellish his journey and who he was. And he was always a very sort of, I don't know if I want to use the word definitive, but in his in seeking his goals, he was very, very definitive, but never felt as though he wanted to be ostentatious, braggish or bragging of sorts. And you know, the fact that he did build a career and became renowned pretty much in the industry with, you know, being the highest ranking Hispanic American. And you would have never noticed, you would have never known. He just worked hard, diligently, and provided for his family. And so the word humility is a big word, and I personally feel that the word humility is taught me a lot. Also, when I was very young, and I think that leaders need to lead with humility. I think it allows you to really embrace others and embrace teamwork and embrace the best of you without necessarily letting your ego get in the way, which oftentimes can tarnish your job.
I love that. First, I love that definitiveness that I think is one of those traits that you need when you're in STEM. But of course, humility, we don't often think of leaders as such, but probably true leadership without humility, that's not. Well, so let me ask you something else. And this is something that I've heard you say before that really resonates with me. So when you are feeling at your most powerless, you should think of a time when you were powerful and use that feeling to summon resilience. Tell me about this thought. I think it's so profound. How does it relate to Luis's legacy? Tell me.
So I won't take credit for it, but as most of us, I think podcasts, obviously, you know, and news talk and things of that nature, we're always searching, right, to better define who we are, how we can be our better selves. I think we end up probably dying trying to figure that out. I think as you get older, the best advice we can give the younger people is that you never stop trying to figure out who you really are. And I think there's beauty in that. And I think as you get older, you find sort of resolve in that mindset that you don't necessarily have to constantly be competing with yourself and your mental stability, let's say, in a way. So it was interesting. And the reason why that hit home is as I think I was driving and I was listening to Hidden Brain, NPR, and they were interviewing someone by the name of, I made myself a note here, Adam Galinsky. And it was basically talking about trying to figure out in battling crisis. And I think at this moment in time, you and I, obviously having cultural roots in Spain, and myself also in Uruguay, that we know that our great grandparents, our grandparents, and even our parents have probably gone through a lot of these challenges that maybe we're seeing here in the US for the first time in a very long time. So there are a lot of individuals that are battling crisis, and the whole angle of the interview was about what you said is how can you possibly bring in a moment where you felt power and use that moment mentally to manifest power during your most powerless moment. And I thought that was, to me, I just resonated. I think it probably resonates with most of us, and that's probably why it was in this podcast with Hidden Brain, because there are things that you can do mentally to sort of dissolve, right? Those moments of powerlessness that you feel, and just to be able to just go into that moment where you felt you had total control over a situation at a moment where you really don't. You're sort of transcending time, correct? And one of the moments I think with my brother while he was in the hospital facing death in a way, it was so interesting to see him when doctors would walk in, or if there were technicians, and because he was a mechanical engineer, we would laugh at this because he would go automatically into talking about some of the equipment and saying how maybe if it would have been engineered this way. And so it was so interesting because here he is in a powerless moment, and he wasn't able to really do anything right as an engineer. However, he's there and he's able to go back to those moments, right? Of intellect, of power as an engineer, because his intellect was still perfect. And he could share maybe some of the do's and don'ts, and maybe, so having that conversation, to me, I think if I had to give you a story and seeing it in action, that was a moment. And sadly, it was a very powerless moment, because as he would tell me, he says, he would tell me all the time, he says, travel, travel, travel. He says, I'm connected to these machines right now, and I probably won't be able to ever travel again because I'm connected to those machines. But at the same time, he was talking about those machines and how maybe they could be enhanced and they could work better because of his mechanical engineering background. And that gave him a moment of power.
I think that is incredibly, I mean, it resonates. It's so deep. I hope that we can all apply it at some point. And it's also, of course, a testament to his engineering mindset through and through, always problem solving, even in the most difficult moments. Thank you for sharing that, Gabby. That's beautiful. Well, so my last question for you is about how lacking diversity undermines the true concept of meritocracy. And I wonder, I think that this is a way that we limit access to talent, right? What advice do you have for Latin Biz Today readers that are interested in improving their own access to talent? Tell us your thoughts.
It's an interesting time for diversity. Having worked in corporate America with corporate America through advertising agencies, and my brother himself, is that obviously working hard, understanding and navigating the challenges are critical. In obviously in any country, right, that you go to. But I think that there is an interesting concept of merit versus mediocrity, right? So, we know that there are times where if you have certain connections, you're able to get the job. It's not always based on merit. But at the same time, I think what's important to understand is, the advice that I've given, and even when I've hired individuals in the past, is collectively, you really need to understand skill sets. Just because maybe an individual didn't get to go to Ivy League school, and maybe went to a public state school, doesn't mean that that person is less than. And what we may find in our circles, right, of multicultural labor force is that obviously going to an Ivy League school is very expensive, right? If it's difficult for affluent households to get into Ivy League, can you imagine for middle and lower income households? So understanding that work experience, I think, plays a huge role. There are a lot of individuals that maybe have the best uh, credentials when it comes to higher education, but have no whatsoever experience to say. So it's almost like I think you need to understand the puzzle. And maybe when you look at multicultural labor markets, you have to expand that and really understand that there's skill, there's experience, there's multilingualism, there may be global access. The fact that if you come from another country and you were an engineer and you actually worked for Hewlett Packard or another company and you were an engineer, and maybe now you're in the US and maybe you're not an engineer. It doesn't mean that just because you were an engineer in another market, in another country, is less. So you need to take into account that in the resume, because maybe that individual actually traveled across international markets, whereas maybe a candidate in the US came right out of school, has never worked in any international markets, can't really understand the dynamics of what an international market and the needs are and the complexities of that. So understanding that the global perspective and having multicultural and multilingualism is an asset, because it really allows you to culturally navigate and understand, also having those soft skills that I think oftentimes we take for granted and are critical. And especially when you think of entrepreneurship and how you navigate those different cultures, and that becomes second nature. And not anyone can handle that. So I think, to me, if I had to look at candidates that have lived abroad in multiple countries, they're a better candidate to me. And having spoken two or even three languages, that's someone that has never traveled outside of the US, no matter if they went to Harvard.
Oh, you're really speaking my language, Gabby. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that we have a long way to go, I guess, in terms of just being better at identifying talent, but I think you've given people some really actionable takeaways to take into consideration the next time that they're looking at a pool of candidates. Look broadly, think very carefully about their multilingualism, and their multiculturalism, and that's something that will be invariably an asset in an entrepreneurial context. I love that.
It is. And when you have to think of packaging, I mean, I've been in situations where, for example, I was at a global conference in London. This was moons ago for the account at that time, which was Johnny Walker Black Label for Diageo. And we were the only independent agency run by women, Hispanic women owned.
Oh,
And and this conference had probably over 200, 300 individuals that came from all over the world. And they were all big public held agencies. And we were the only. And we also developed a platform for the brand 4 years before it was even developed for the non-Hispanic white general market in the US. And it was because of the resilience of working extra hard and the research, and because we understood the marketplace at that time. And the marketplace from a Hispanic perspective in the US, that Hispanic male shared the same angst, the same motivations, the same dreams that others did in other countries. But the non-Hispanic white male did not share those same motivations until years later when the market took a dive. And then there was more unified feeling of not discernment, but really understanding of what we call masculine progress. It's like you have to work harder towards progress. So, the reason we came up with that was because just Hispanic males felt that way. That was very insightful for our segment. And it just so happens that, guys in India or in Latin America were feeling the same way.
Wow. And you would have never had
So, and
insight.
it would have had that insight. So, it's important to understand that, unfortunately, as we all know, uh, packaging plays a role, right? So sometimes packaging looks great, but there's no substance. And
Yeah.
sometimes there's substance, but then it's basically sort of, what would I just sort of what's the right word to use? Discarded because the packaging is not appropriate or it's not to the level that whomever's making those decisions. So I would venture to say that it's also important to, even though you have the substance, you have to understand your marketplace and also make sure packaging is appropriate for the marketplace. And when I say packaging, as we all know, it's not just about a product that you're selling, but it's yourself, it's your product, it's your company, and the imaging of that, because you may have a lot more to offer, but unfortunately, people may not even consider you if the packaging doesn't necessarily fit their image of what, the 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 person or the company that they're trying to do business with looks like.
Oh, indeed, indeed. And this applies in every single industry. Form and content, absolutely important. They go together. Well, Gabby, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know that Luis has left an indelible mark on all the people that knew him. He's also helped a much broader generation of aspiring engineers, and for that, I think we should all be very grateful for this incredible legacy. Thank you again for joining me in this conversation that I think is going to inspire our readers at Latin Biz today. Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.